"Sign it or get out," my husband said, sliding the papers across the lawyer's desk. I stared at him. "You're kicking me out of my own house?" He smirked like the answer was obvious. Then the lawyer quietly cleared his throat. "My name is Danielle Parker, and I'm 36 years old. I teach math at a public middle school. I've spent my career explaining to 12-year-olds that numbers don't lie, that if you follow the steps carefully and check your work honestly, the answer will always be there waiting for you. I believed that about more than just math. I believed it about life. I had been married for 15 years. 15 years of splitting responsibilities the way people do when they're building something together, and both of them are showing up every day to do their part. I handled the practical architecture of our life, the budget, the bills, the mortgage payments logged in spreadsheets that my husband never opened and never asked about because he trusted me to handle them, and I always did. He ran a small construction company. It grew slowly over the years, and he was proud of it in the loud, public way that some people are proud of things. At family gatherings, his relatives made jokes about how he was the real provider while I just graded papers. They said it lightly, the way people say things they mean but want to be able to take back if necessary. I smiled and changed the subject because I had learned that some arguments aren't worth having in someone else's kitchen. I wasn't flashy. I drove a car with 200,000 miles on it and packed my lunch every day and wore the same winter coat for 6 years because it still worked fine, and there was no reason to replace something that worked fine. I didn't need people to notice what I contributed. I just needed it to be real. And it was real. More real than anyone in that lawyer's office that day had thought to check. Because I had been the one managing our mortgage from the very beginning. Every payment, every statement, every tax document going back 15 years, organized in folders on a hard drive that my husband didn't know the password to because he had never needed it. He had never needed it because I had always handled it. That was the thing he forgot when he slid those papers across the desk. He forgot who had been keeping the record. If you've ever been treated like your contribution didn't count because it wasn't loud or visible or attached to a business name, you already know how that specific dismissal feels. It's not just insulting. It's disorienting. Subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better. Have you ever been told something wasn't yours when you helped build it from the ground up? Tell me in the comments. Click hype before we keep going. He told me to meet him at a lawyer's office on a Tuesday afternoon. He said it was about updating paperwork. He used that phrase specifically. Updating paperwork. As if it were routine. As if we did this regularly, and I should simply show up and bring a pen. I drove there after school still wearing my lanyard with my teacher ID. The office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown with a receptionist who offered me water and a waiting area that smelled like leather and central air conditioning. I sat down and waited for my husband and thought about the stack of tests I needed to grade by Thursday. He arrived with his lawyer already beside him. That was the first sign. You don't bring your own lawyer to routine paperwork. Inside the office, they placed a document in front of me. A post-nuptial agreement. I read the title, and then read the first paragraph, and then looked up at my husband across the polished desk. "Your company is growing," he said. "I need assets protected." "Protected from your wife?" I asked. He shrugged with the particular ease of someone who has rehearsed the conversation and felt good about how it went in his head. "You don't contribute to the house anyway." The lawyer looked at the wall behind my left shoulder. I reminded my husband that I had managed our finances for the first several years of our marriage, that I had organized every payment, every transfer, every document since before his company had its first contract. "You wrote checks," he said. "That's not the same thing." He told me to sign the document or move out immediately. His voice was flat and final the way voices get when someone has convinced themselves they're being reasonable. The lawyer shuffled papers quietly on the desk between us. I was sitting in front of a stranger while my husband talked about me like I was an administrative inconvenience he had decided to resolve. I told him I needed time to review the paperwork. He laughed and told the lawyer I was being dramatic. The lawyer found something very interesting to read on the page in front of him. I drove home with a document uncovered in my passenger seat and went directly to the storage boxes in the back of the closet where I kept physical copies of old financial records. I found it in the third box. A 20-year-old mortgage record, slightly yellowed at the edges, the paper soft from years of being folded. I smoothed it flat on the kitchen table under the overhead light and read it carefully. The original down payment on our house had been transferred from my personal savings account. Not a joint account. Not a business account. My account. Before his company existed. Before we had combined anything financially. I had put my savings into the foundation of that house and then spent 15 years maintaining it, and he had just sat across a lawyer's desk and told me I hadn't built anything. I put the document down carefully and sat very still in my kitchen for a long time. I brought the mortgage record to him the next morning. I placed it on the kitchen counter and pointed to the account number and the transfer date and waited. He looked at it briefly. "That was a long time ago," he said. "I've paid everything since." He turned and poured his coffee. Within the week, he began moving money from our joint accounts into his business accounts. I noticed the transfers in our online banking and documented each one with screenshots and timestamps. He told his relatives that I was trying to take his house. He used that word specifically. His. At a family barbecue 2 weeks later, his brother made the joke loudly enough for the whole backyard to hear. "So Danielle's trying to claim the house now." Everyone was holding plates of food, and someone laughed, and my husband shook his head with the expression of a patient man dealing with an unreasonable situation. "She wants half of what she didn't build," he said. I was standing 6 feet away. He knew I could hear him. That was the point. His lawyer sent a formal letter 10 days after the office meeting. It stated I had 10 days to sign the post-nuptial agreement or risk losing my housing rights entirely. 10 days. The letter was written in the crisp language of documents designed to make people feel like the outcome has already been decided and resistance is merely procedural. I put the letter in a folder and kept digging. I pulled 15 years of tax returns, mortgage payment histories printed from the bank portal, statements from the joint account going back to the beginning. I spread them across the dining room table and began building a timeline the way I would build a lesson plan. Start with what you know, establish the sequence. Let the numbers lead you to the answer. The sadness I had been carrying since that lawyer's office began to change shape as I worked. It didn't disappear. But underneath it, something else was forming. Something that had no interest in being dramatic or emotional or loud. Something that just wanted to be accurate. I stopped arguing with him. I stopped responding to the comments that filtered back to me from relatives. I became very quiet and I worked. What nobody in my husband's circle understood about me was something I had never advertised because it had never seemed important to mention. I love financial spreadsheets the way some people love music. I always have. Numbers in organized systems, properly categorized and cross-referenced, tell a story that is impossible to dispute if you've been careful enough in the recording of it. Over the years, I had built detailed digital records of our household finances simply because it interested me and because being organized about money had always felt like basic responsible behavior. Every mortgage payment logged by date and amount. Every tax deduction noted with a corresponding document. Every bank transfer between accounts labeled and saved. My husband had seen me working on these spreadsheets occasionally over the years and assumed it was a teacher's habit, the compulsive organizing of someone who spent their days managing classroom materials and lesson structures. He never asked what was actually in them. What was in them was a complete financial biography of our marriage. I opened the files and began reviewing them with the mortgage record beside me. What I found took me 2 evenings to fully process. Several years of mortgage payments had come from our joint account during periods when my salary represented the primary income. His business had gone through slow stretches, 2 of them lasting longer than a year, and during those stretches the household had run on what I brought home. The joint account record showed the deposits and the corresponding mortgage withdrawals in the same clean columns I had maintained since the beginning. The house had been started with my savings. It had been sustained in significant part by my income. The story my husband was telling about a house he had built and paid for alone was not supported by a single document in any of the folders I had organized. I built a full financial report. Clean. Dated. Sourced. The kind of report that doesn't require interpretation because the numbers say exactly what they mean. I called Dr. Helen Carter on a Thursday evening. Helen was a retired accountant who had run financial literacy workshops for teachers at our district several years earlier. She was precise and direct, and had the particular patience of someone who had spent decades explaining complex things to people who needed them simplified without being condescended to. She had told our workshop group once that financial records are the clearest form of truth available to ordinary people and that most people never use them because they don't know what they have. I told her what was happening. She asked me to send the documents. She called me back 2 days later. "These records are stronger than most legal cases I've seen," she said. There was no excitement in her voice, just the calm assessment of someone looking at evidence and reporting what it shows. We spent 2 sessions reconstructing the full financial timeline of the house together. She identified additional supporting documents I hadn't thought to include and showed me how to organize the presentation so that every claim was immediately traceable to a specific record. My husband, during this same period, had begun house hunting online. I knew because he left tabs open on the shared family computer, either carelessly or deliberately, and I saw the listings for 2-bedroom apartments in the area. He told mutual friends the divorce would be quick and easy. He said it with the confidence of a man who has made a plan and believes the other person in it has no options. I said nothing to anyone. I kept working. Helen recommended presenting everything during formal mediation, where submitted evidence must be reviewed by the mediator before any agreement can proceed. We scheduled it for the following month. My husband agreed to mediation because his lawyer told him it would be faster than court, and he assumed it would simply formalize what he considered already settled. I sat with that assumption and let him keep it. The mediation office was on the 3rd floor of a building near the courthouse. The room had a long rectangular table, 2 windows with the blinds half drawn, and the faint persistent smell of dry erase markers from a whiteboard on the far wall. The mediator was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain and the unhurried manner of someone who has sat in rooms like this many times and is never surprised by what people bring into them. My husband settled into his chair with the posture of a man attending a meeting he has already won. He placed his hands flat on the table and looked at the mediator with the open, reasonable expression he used in professional settings when he wanted to be perceived as the calm one. "I paid for the house," he said. "She's here because she wants a payout she didn't earn." I placed my folder on the table without responding. Helen sat beside me and opened her own copy of the financial report. She began walking the mediator through the timeline in the same unhurried, methodical voice she had used in our workshops. The original down payment, the account it came from, the date of transfer relative to the date his company was incorporated. She moved forward through the years, the slow periods in his business, the joint account deposits during those years, the mortgage payments drawn from those same deposits, the tax returns listing both names as equal financial contributors across the full span of the marriage. Each document placed on the table was sourced, dated, and bank certified. Each one landed in the room with the quiet weight of something that cannot be argued with, only accepted. My husband leaned forward. "Those numbers are twisted." Helen looked at him calmly over her reading glasses. "They're bank certified." He tried twice more to reframe what the documents showed. The mediator listened to him each time and then returned to the records on the table with the same focused attention. The room was very quiet between his attempts. The half-drawn blinds cast thin lines of afternoon light across the papers. I let the silence sit for a moment after his second attempt. Then I spoke. "You told everyone I didn't build this house," I said. My voice was steady and unhurried. "The numbers say otherwise." He looked at me, and for the first time since the lawyer's office, he had nothing immediate to say back. The mediator reviewed the 20-year-old mortgage record, the joint account histories, and the tax documents in sequence. She took her time. Nobody spoke while she read. Then she set the papers down and stated clearly that the property could not legally be considered his alone based on the documented financial history. The post-nuptial agreement he had attempted to force me to sign, the one that would have transferred full ownership to him, had no legal foundation that could survive the evidence currently on the table. His plan collapsed in that room in the quiet, methodical way that plans collapse when they were built on a version of events that the documents don't support. I moved forward with the separation on my own terms. The house was recognized as a shared marital asset by the court. His attempt to remove me from it, the ultimatum in the lawyer's office, the letter with its 10-day deadline, the months of telling relatives I had no claim, all of it came to nothing because the records said something different, and the records were what mattered. Some of his relatives reached out afterward. Their messages were brief and slightly formal, the careful language of people apologizing for something they're not entirely sure how to name. I responded politely and kept the exchanges short. I kept teaching at the same school. I drove the same car. I packed my lunch and graded papers in the evening and continued building the quiet, organized life I had always lived. My mentor Helen told me over coffee one afternoon that careful, unglamorous work almost always gets ignored until the precise moment it becomes the only thing that matters. I thought about that for a long time. For 15 years, my husband had watched me manage spreadsheets and file documents and organize folders he never opened, and he had decided it was just a habit, a quirk, something a teacher does because teachers like systems. He never considered that those systems were building something, that every logged payment and saved statement and documented transfer was accumulating into a record that told the true version of our shared life. He slid papers across a desk and told me to sign or leave. He forgot who had been keeping the real record the entire time. The numbers were always there. I just made sure they were organized well enough to speak for themselves when it finally mattered. If someone ever tried to erase your contribution or convince you and everyone around you that your work didn't count, you already understand what it feels like to have the ground shift under something you helped build. It isn't just unfair. It changes how you see the person who did it. Share your story in the comments. Has someone ever taken credit for what you quietly created or maintained? Subscribe so this community can stand beside the voices that were overlooked. Click hype to help this story reach someone who needs the reminder today. Did this story hit home for you? Let me know by liking the video and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. If you've ever had to stand up for yourself after years of being underestimated, I would genuinely love to hear about it. Click hype to help this story reach more people who might need it. Your support makes a real difference, and I read every comment.